time we go. Gotta learn to let it go. Once asleep, now awake, feeling every breath you take.
Welcome to Wake the F Up podcast, hosted by Alix and David Long, where we talk about living consciously and helping people uncover their essential selves so that they can stop sleepwalking through life. Our goal is to create a safe space where our guests can share how they've decided to wake the F up and become mindfulness experts through their own emotional healing journey. Welcome to Wake the F Up podcast. I'm your host, Alix Long, along with my co-host and husband, David Long. We have two amazing guests today with us, Dr. Cindy Ashkins and Dr. Bob Gervey. Dr. Cindy has been a licensed clinician since 1980 and is a certified Imago relationship therapist and workshop presenter. Dr. Bob Gervey is a medical psychologist whose work integrates medication management with his clinical services. They are life partners and work partners. As the creators of Mindful Love workshops, which teach couples numerous relations skills, including how to be present to themselves and each other. Welcome, Dr. Bob and Dr. Cindy. I'm so excited to have you guys on the podcast. We were giggling before we recorded that this is your podcast, Virginity Loss.
Yes.
And I want the world to meet you guys. It makes me get a little choked up. Dr. Bob and I have been very, very close. Cindy, I know so many people actually that have gone to you. A lot of my friends have been to y'all's workshop, the couples workshop that you guys do. Nice. But Dr. Bob actually potentially single-handedly, along with course therapist, Celeste Schexnader, probably saved my son's life. So his work and what he does in both therapy and medication management, man, you hit my family at such a critical time, and you're always kind of deep in my heart. And I owe a lot to you. I think you were the most thorough psychiatrist I've ever met, and actually the only, I recommend you to everyone. So welcome both of you. And I just thought maybe would want to start talking a little bit about yourselves. And Cindy, tell us a little bit about you.
So you want to start?
You start.
Okay. So I'm native from Connecticut and went, transferred to Tulane and went, right from undergraduate to graduate in social work, and threw myself into charity emergency ER, all 4 emergency rooms. And I said, wow, I don't have enough education to be doing this work. So I went back for my doctorate at the same time that I co-owned a jazz club uptown. So
cool. Did not know that.
Casual. And then got into private practice and focused my dissertation on addiction and relationships, where there was at the time very little information. And of course, then trauma comes in.
Of course.
So during my dissertation, I figured out that I didn't know a whole lot about how to make relationships work. So I put myself in the Imago relationship training. And then post-Katrina, since, 85% of the psychiatrists left and 2/3 of the population, I called up Imago and said, hey, I've been a member for this long, and can you all support me in going for the next level of education? So I became a workshop presenter. And so early in 2006, we started offering those workshops in a renovated garage in the house we were in.
Wow.
So I'm not familiar with the workshops at all. Tell me, how does the workshop work? What is it?
The Imago workshops are based on Harville Hendrix's book, Getting the Love You Want. And it's how you both consciously and more so unconsciously pick partners. What we used to call chemical attraction, or that magnetic energy, is really an unconscious agenda to fix your childhood. If you could just hold that as a hypothesis. And it's a communication model. So it teaches couples really more how to listen than how to talk to their partner. And it's gentle communication, and it's really listening for the essence of what the partner is feeling and needs and wants, and how to make sense of that, and then empathize with feelings. So it gives a structure and a language for couples.
Wow. And then Bob, you're also, you co-run these with her.
I do. And we're having a little,
it's okay if your dog is barking.
Wolf here. But
we also have a little doodle, and they love to join in on the podcast.
Napping and woofing.
So, one of the powerful things about when we do the group together is that we are a couple that model it. and oftentimes it's been in the past just in the nick of time because we were at each other's throats, and so we would use the group and it was like, oh, thank God, because we would work along with the couples and do our work there with them. So it was a very healthy thing for us. And it just so happens, I'm not going to go into the details, don't freak out, but this morning we needed to do an incredible dialogue because we were at each other's throats this past weekend, and last week. It's been a really tough time for us because, we come to the world seeing the world very differently. And oftentimes it's not an accident. We have very similar sort of family of origin constellations, but we couldn't be more polar opposite in terms of how we coped and what lessons we took from that same stimulus. So my worldview and the way I cope with it drives her crazy because it's antithetical to her solution. And when she does her thing on it, it gets right under my skin and I can't. So we go at each other, like really we react, and we know better. But
so common.
We do.
But how refreshing is this, right? So actually, this is why I like Harville Hendrix a lot. His Imago work. So I was lucky enough to land into the arms of Jan Cahoe. That's our therapist and my therapist for 2 marriages now. And she, I know, is colleagues with y'all, but also I think, Cindy, you were her therapist at one point, which I know she would say out loud to many people. She loves you. And so she actually taught me probably 2014, the dialogue technique. I think she actually matriculates maybe a different one than I have it from his book, but it is behavioral request change form. And I've actually used this. I use this probably 30 times a day. Exactly what you guys are talking about. I renamed it. Sorry, Harville Hendrix, but I call it the fear chart because I'm like, behavioral request change form is kind of long. Right. But for me, it's actually like it always hits my trigger is always being reactionary, exactly what you're saying, to something that I'm actually deeply afraid of. And it's usually like whatever my global desire is being hit, and I'm not being seen in the way that I need to be seen in order for my inner self to feel lovable. And so it's really awesome to hear, obviously doctors are people, and therapists are as well, have many problems and have to work through them themselves. And I think, that's the thing about healing. It never stops, right? It's a constant working on things. So that's really awesome.
When he mentioned that I get the same feeling about this podcast sometimes. Like I get a lot out of our communication. It's kind of like a more structured way for us to kind of communicate and tell each other's feelings. And I love to hear her work through her stuff while I can just listen. And then it kind of, for whatever reason, this setting kind of allows me to not feel like I need to fix it or to do something. I can just listen because it's a podcast. I'm supposed to just be kind of listening and interacting, and it is extremely therapeutic. And we've had a lot of guests where at the end of the show I feel better about us than in the beginning, which is really great. And I often mention this about therapy. One of the wonderful things about therapy, particularly if you're a therapy virgin like I was 4 years ago, is to have affirmation of get the immediate feedback of a behavioral change or thought change is extremely refreshing. Because sometimes, and I hear this sometimes, people say, I've been doing all this therapy and I'm still, you know what I mean?
Mad. Like, what's the change model? What's the trajectory? How do we get better at this?
Right.
And
it's nice to get better and to actually see the end result get better with the person you love, and you can see almost immediate improvement in your relationship. It happens almost like this.
Well, and I was wondering, so like, do you guys practice from this perspective? And I think the best therapist, and I know you both are the best. So like I can say that with full force. Cindy, I know that personally we haven't worked together, but I have heard about you from hundreds of people. And I have at least 5 or 6 couples that literally, now one did get divorced, but they needed to get divorced. And I think your workshop, it was evident.
All we promise is clarity.
Well, that's the thing about the imago work. Like, if your partner doesn't want to take place in tools or doing the work,
Right.
there's really not much you can do. And I think that you guys said that even to the couple, and they both heard it.
Right.
And the husband was just like, I'm never going to do this. And she was like, well, I have some thinking to do. Like, am I going to be able to stay in this?
Right.
But I was wondering, I saw a therapist prior to seeing Jan, and who I consider to be like, the end all who got me through cancer. Jan's biggest thing is giving tools. And it's kind of like Stutz, if you've watched that Netflix special. It's like, if you have a tool, you can manage some of your own time away from therapy, right? Therapy is so important, but our daily life isn't lived in a therapist's office. I might be 1 to 2, if I'm lucky, hours a week. And so imago therapy is amazing because this communication dialogue gives people tools on how to meet their partner in resistance, right? Do you find you need that?
Yeah, you can call it BCR. You don't have to say the whole thing.
Yeah.
Sometimes
I renamed it.
Just
the
talk
fear
about
chart.
it. What's the behavior, And we unconsciously pick partners that are actually going to bring up our childhood stuff and trigger us. And with a romantic partner, this being the brain, you're going to go from prefrontal cortex to your survival brain, which is fight, flight, freeze, or faint. You're going to go right back here and become a 3-year-old and may come out with a reaction. The dialogue allows you to get back to being an adult and having a rational conversation.
Yeah. Wouldn't it be nice to have that information before you get married? I mean,
like in high school.
Exactly.
Right.
Like we always talk about, I remember in the 80s and 90s, all these news stories about how the divorce rate was skyrocketing and it's going to be over 50%. And the more I learn about couples and childhood trauma and all things, I think 50% is way low. It probably should be, much, much higher. I mean, I think the divorce rate could be as high as 90%, considering how we get into relationships.
Right.
And if you get into a relationship for exactly what you just said, which is literally my first marriage, I 100% picked my first wife because I knew that she would never, ever ask me to tell her how I felt. And she picked me because she knew that I would never require her to tell me how she felt. And it was a horrible
contract.
It was a horrible silence, for a lot of years, with both of us just kind of shoving all of our needs and feelings down.
Right.
Yeah. And then when she died, he was like, you were what?
Yeah. When she died, that no longer worked. So that coping strategy of shoving it down,
right.
It was like a geyser. It just blew, and all those years of keeping it shoved down, it came out. And a gift, society in my grief said it's okay.
Right. It's okay for a man to feel this heavy.
As a man, after my wife died, it was okay for me to be in the fetal position. It was okay for me to cry a lot. It was okay for me to be unstable.
Right.
Which my whole life it had never been. That was not okay.
Right.
You had to produce, and you had to take care of everything, and you had to never complain and never tell her that you needed more. And you know what I mean?
And the language of love is feeling talk, and empathy is a muscle that's really necessary. Yeah. Bob, you want to, well, first let me say, I was so nervous we were not going to get through this conflict because it started probably Friday, Saturday, Sunday. We're on the plane last night. And I'm like, oh my gosh, we're going to go on this podcast and we're not going to be connected or clicking or feeling loving. And so it was a early morning conversation over coffee, and it was like a breakthrough, I think, for both of us, an aha. Mm-hmm. Would you like to say how the relationship started? You want to just tell a little bit about that? You could tell the clean version of it.
I was impressed by how academic the academic story that you presented yourself in. That's a
well, it's vital that she talks about charity. I'm like, I'm sorry, anyone who goes through charity,
right?
You saw some stuff, and especially in psychiatric.
Yeah, she saw some. Yeah, that gives her street cred in the New Orleans community, right?
100%. That's right. Anyone, like everyone talked. Carl, my first husband, always talked about charity being just like this hub. And then I met David. He did his residency all through there. And anyone, nurses, doctors, that roll through there.
We could have an
We could have a
entire
whole podcast
Absolutely.
on therapy.
The accident
talking
room.
about
Oh my God.
yeah, talking about just the daily trauma
Yeah.
in that place that I just walked out of the building and never thought about. You know what I mean? I did my job, and then it never entered my brain that I would carry all that stuff with me all those years. You know, that
Right.
all the stuff you see, you carry it. And I just push that shit down
Right.
so hard
And
because
I was doing rape, battered women, child abuse, and sexual
Right.
abuse.
right.
I can't even imagine.
Right.
I
And
can't even imagine.
I was doing gunshot wounds and knife, you know,
Yeah.
knife wounds.
Yeah. On a
And
regular
it's
basis.
a lot. Yeah, it's a lot.
It's a lot. It makes you really jaded. I remember he said, you know, he always thought about doing trauma surgery, and that was his, you know, first rotation or first residency.
I think this is,
and he was like, I'll
think-
lose
you
it
know
if I
what?
stay in this.
Seriously, I think this is bullshit, because it's easy to talk about the horror and the atrocity as professionals in a hospital. No doubt that that's
Yeah.
true.
Right.
But give me a break.
Yeah.
What were we just
Like the
talking
people.
about?
Oh yeah.
What were we
100%.
just talking about? To them, the Imago, model and couples work. That's all about repairing the horror and atrocities and the wounds that occur from living in your friggin' house with your mother and father and your
Right.
happy little siblings and your grandma and grandpa. Right? You don't have to be in charity hospital to have credibility to know what horror is. But it's easy
You're right.
No.
to talk about what your credential is because you're in a prescribed community and
No,
and you
that's
were
why you worked at charity, because you had the history with trauma.
you then
Well, that's right.
Maybe so.
attribute your acumen to being trained in that setting, where I'm basically, and I think our experience this morning in our repair wasn't that you were in charity, wasn't that I grew up and I worked at Bronx Psychiatric Center or what. It was that we had the communication tools to go dig deep, and I talked about my trauma living with a crazy mom.
Yeah. Well, I think you're right. Like, actually, all the personal trauma I've been through, which has been a lot.
It's so much more significant.
It is, and your childhood.
Anything that you horror story that any one of us
For
can
sure.
say that we dealt with professionally or in
That's
Yeah.
true.
a community.
That's
Because
true. And when you look at a
vicarious.
patient load,
That's a vicarious
Yeah.
experience, and yet
That's
always, it's safer to talk about that. So we talk
That's
about
right.
that.
And it's not parent bashing. It's just identifying what you got
Well.
too much of or didn't
Well-
get enough of.
Well, you're by definition detached, right? I mean, because you're not.
Right.
I did go home, right?
Right.
And you're right. Like the trauma from your childhood, you can leave, but you come back. You know what I mean? There's no
It
other
doesn't leave
place
you.
to.
Right.
You're gonna keep that, and you're totally right. In fact, we had a podcast guest a couple of weeks ago, she was a widow who had married a non-widow, or boyfriend, sorry. And we were talking about how much that she shared with him, and she said, well, he hadn't been through what I've been through, so I don't really share with him too much.
She meant when she was really in deep grief.
And I was struck with
moments.
nope, I don't even know him. I never met him, but I guarantee you he has some trauma,
Right.
Right.
from his childhood.
And that's
So
part of the
that's-
hypothesis, that you marry
It's true.
somebody that's developmentally wounded at the same level you are
Exactly.
and has opposite coping strategies.
Right. And that's where we conflict as well. I mean, that's universal. Like when my wound rubs her wound, it's fireworks. I mean, it is
Fireworks.
when her wound goes off and mine's not, it's cool. I can listen and I can be supportive.
Right.
But every once in a while, my wound will rub her wound, and it's hard.
It sounds like it's the same kind of weekend you guys have.
Right.
When you guys are looking at your patients, both, maybe simultaneously or working together in the workshops, do you notice across the board that when you're running through the behavioral request change form, that people get stuck on a certain section? Like, I find that the stories in my head are my parents, are the ways that my parents abandoned me, are the subliminal messages in my home and the trauma. And then, of course, the global desire, do you find comes down to 2 to 3 things?
So,
Are you seeing patterns within that?
you know, I want everybody to, it's meant to be a dramatic 3-year-old. They used to make us jump up and down and wave our hands and scream our global desire. I want everybody to pay attention to me all the time. I want nobody to touch me ever. I want to be happy all the time, whatever it is. So it's that 3-year-old inside of us. The challenge of the workshop is couples come in really raw, sometimes on a Friday night, sometimes on a Saturday morning, and to see the transformation and the glow on their faces when we do closing circle and gratitude for themselves and their partner. So different parts of the workshop, because it's different languaging and it's places they've never been, they're workshop versions, you know. So it's places they've never been. And global desire is unmet childhood needs. And there are hundreds of dependency needs. Did I answer your question?
And it did. And you know what's been what changed? Like, I think that Harville Hendrix work has changed my life. So even though it's meant to be a communication dialogue technique, I have actually matriculated that chart for myself. And whenever I'm frustrated, whenever I'm angry, I even use it for sad, although it often asks for a frustrating behavior. I take any emotion that I'm feeling that I can't seem to shake off, and I'll run that chart in my head, because what I want to know to be true is, because I'm a mom and I'm a business owner and I'm constantly in communication with others and feeling frustrated about things around me. And what I learned was, growing up with a narcissist, and then my mom, who suffers deeply from depression, that I was always abandoned, right? Either abandoned because I wasn't good enough, or I was abandoned because there just wasn't enough space or emotional energy for my parents to show up for all 6 of us. And it's interesting that chart has helped me dismantle or disarm a lot of my reactionary behaviors, where I felt so angry and resentful all the time in partnerships and just in self.
Right.
And the truth is that beneath it all, what I've realized is that I never felt good enough. I never felt lovable. And when I get to the story and the fear and the global desire, or even the childhood memory, I immediately say, like, I'm not mad at David. I'm not mad at my coworker. I'm not even mad at my child. It's hitting me. And this is about my father wound. And I need to just take some breaths here and stop reacting to whatever external stimuli is causing the reaction.
And you can do a behavior change request for yourself. What would you like to change within the next 2 weeks? What do you want to be doing 3 times a week?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Honestly, you know, what's funny is, like, my business partner who created this company with me, she would always laugh, because she's like a little bit more type A. She'd be like, you got to do the 3 things to change. And I was like, I don't know if I'm like more of a science nerd, but I was like, oh, all I really need is to know. And then I know how to change. Like, but I never did practice, like, what are the 3 ways that you're going to do something? That's very much like, I like that, because it's a little bit like Codependent No More as well, where you're like, take an active role in your own healing. Right.
So tell a little bit about our early
Okay, but I will, you know, but I guess I do want to, for your listeners.
Yeah, I knew Bob was going to be a natural podcaster.
Underscore that, Alix, you and David, you know, you're unusual in the sense that
we are. Most
people coming through our group, through the workshop, are ill-equipped or poorly, not committed as much, and don't have the resources or invest the resources to incorporate that experience and that language in their ongoing life. So it's a myth that, and it's an injustice for, and we articulate this to our members. The workshop is a stepping stone to then begin the work with your therapy and ongoing, because you can't just take this tool and utilize it, because the level of distortion that occurs between a couple trying to get through a dialogue is so loud and disorienting and distracting. They don't get to an improvement place.
That makes sense.
So what's essential with this work is you take it to heart and you really utilize it. It's us utilizing it this morning and pulling on the tools to go, God, we know better.
Right. And that's one of
Mhm.
25 dialogues per se for Harville Hendrix. And most people come home and throw it under the bed and
Right.
never to be seen again. Even if you say to them, if you book a
Right.
couple session after, bring your workbook.
Right.
It has a lot of
So it's,
information.
you know,
And Hendrix,
I know. And that we'll often be like,
Yeah.
let's dialogue that. I'd say, let's fear chart that. And he'll be like, oh, don't
Fuck
make me
me.
do
Right.
it. Because he,
right. And you know,
he
Hendrix
knows.
is one of the top three and probably the least popular of the top three. John Gottman, Sue Johnson model are have a lot more cachet these days. And I find this really hands-on and useful for couples because
his work is
Yeah.
incredible. And I loved his honesty in the book too. Okay. First of all, if you just stay the course, people, getting the love you want, it's hard to buy that book. And first of all, if you buy it in Barnes and Noble, you're like, thank God for Amazon. You're like,
Right.
this is an embarrassing title, but it's the most powerful book, right?
buying it for clients. Yep.
I know. And you know, the truth is he's really honest in the beginning. It's really scary to read that intro where you're like, I chose my partner because this is repressed parts of my parents. So I love my dad and my mom. Like you're kind of like, it can
Well,
screw with your head a little bit, but it's powerful and true.
It brings into question for me, like, what is love? What is attraction? You know, all these things that we have kind of preconceived notions of what they're about. For example, had you asked me before, I would have told you 100% I love my first wife. But when I learned like how I ended up with her and why we chose each other, is that love?
Right.
You have to redefine it, right? Because it wasn't, I don't know, it was certainly not, that's not the fairy book or the fairy tale book version of how you fall in love.
And it
And
might
this,
have been
by the way, is also not the fairy
Yeah,
tale.
I'm like, by the way, we've
Yeah.
got 5 grieving kids. Like we're also like in therapy a lot. So you're right. Like I do this technique on alone, just to be clear about, but I do it. I need it so much. Like I'd have to hire like an in-house therapist at our house to can make it through the day because we've got, you know, 3 kids. His 3 kids lost their mom to a brain aneurysm overnight, right? And everything in their life, although you can hear, might have between David and Betsy been a little bit under the scenes, not a good communicating marriage. The children had no idea, and neither did the external community that surrounded them. She was a wonderful friend. He was a thriving physician. So their 3 kids were like, wait, what? You guys had problems? And then I come along.
They wouldn't have recognized it because they were exactly the same. I mean,
And love, I
exactly the
wouldn't
same.
say, David, that wasn't love, but there are different love.
Yeah, agreed.
Can evolve, and it can
Right.
mean it can get deeper. You know, I mean, I think that's
Right.
part of.
right.
You know, we in the workshop you talk about the developmental stages of a relationship and romantic love.
Right.
You know, versus the
Power struggle.
power struggle, which most people then fall out of love and said, feel like they got ripped off, a bait and switch kind of deal, and no, this is not what I want, and they leave and they don't survive. To then, a mature love, right?
Right, which is a choice. And
Right.
You know, and,
truthfully, who comes in the workshop is one of the 2 partners who's dragging the other. And Hendrix talked about the dragger and the draggee. And it doesn't matter. You're both here. Conflict is supposed to happen, which is a lovely reframe. Let's figure out how to use it to help us grow. If
Do you find that couples who don't conflict have issues, greater issues?
Say it again.
You find that couples who do not have conflict, who do not address their problems, who do not have, these ruptures and need to be repaired, do you find they have a harder time
I never
than
see
couples
those
that are?
couples.
I guess not.
And if I have a couple that comes in and they're pretty much flatlined and on 2 ends of the sofa, I tell them, like, I'm a little bit scared, you guys. I wish you would tell me about some conflict. And they are just, it's flat. And couples usually come in too late, honestly, because it's, there's still a stigma about it.
We used to talk about, Betsy and I used to talk about it in bed sometimes, about like friends that we knew that went to therapy. And I swear to God, we would tell it. I agree. She'd be like, "Whoa, thank God we don't have those."
we don't do that because we would split up, right?
Right. And I was like, I agree with her. I was like, man, yeah, therapy. I thank God we don't need that shit.
And that fits the model that you said that both of you had, because suppression worked. Right. If you had to emote that, yes, you would have gotten divorced
Right.
because you would have not been able to
Right.
tell. You would have violated.
And we
You violated.
right, and we both came from families of origins where suppression was our mutual
Right.
coping
And I think it
strategy,
comes outside.
and we survived the childhood
Right.
by
Right.
suppressing it. Worked really well
And I grew
right up
up in
until
a
it
family
didn't work.
like y'all are talking about. Both lost spouses, each had 2 kids, and we were thrown together before the Brady Bunch was ever
Oh
on TV,
God,
and nobody ever
Cindy,
talked about it.
are you okay? Do you like your stepmom or do you still hate her? Tell me there's hope for me.
No. It's my mom and stepdad.
Oh,
Might have
stepdad,
been like
sorry.
that. I was young, and yeah, we
I know.
survived and never talked about it. So
And that
Oh,
is
that's really
part
hard.
of the crux of this morning's
Yeah.
discussion. The two
Yeah.
different worldviews of what family means and our
Yeah.
commitment to that.
right.
It's so
Yeah.
hard, isn't it? It's so hard. I think that's one of our biggest struggles or my biggest struggle, I'll at least speak for myself, is I constantly, and I don't know if it's because I never had it in childhood, but I had the surface image of it. So I had a physician father who looked very successful and a beautiful mother and 6 kids, and it looked a certain way, but behind closed doors,
Right.
it was a very different way. And I would say that the things that hyper marked what I feel is families, like Christmas cards and, holiday things and all these traditional things, where now, because we have so much grief in the home with all the children and ourselves, holidays or anything that I used to associate with family is a really tough time. And we can't always get our ducks in a row. Nobody's ever going to be happy in those moments. Sometimes grief's popping up at this weirdest stuff. And
But it's teaching us to let go.
it is. It's teaching me to let go of my identity as family, that I have to reframe that blending and recreating a family from 2 widows and grieving children.
Right.
It has to look so different for us. And I grieve that simplicity of creating something with someone that you don't have to question or you don't have to be questioned, because the roles were just set in stone and that's all people know. And it's really, but it's also on the benefit side of things, like, right, it makes me constantly ask myself, what am I doing? Why am I here?
Right.
I'm consciously choosing to be the mother of this house and to be in this new
Well, but
marriage. And it's that part.
It's also a myth.
Awesome.
It's a myth that you're
It
going,
is.
oh, I wish we didn't have to deal with these deaths. It would have been so much easier and simpler if we were an intact family. Bullshit. I mean, then you would, if that was the case, then couples who come from that kind of environment and individuals that come would be really not our customers. But
Right.
that's not the
Right.
case.
But they
Right?
are.
And
That's
and
right.
I think the depth is worth everything. The depth of connecting with another person in relationship is so rewarding, and watching that connection in the workshop. In those early workshops right after Katrina, there were no resources
Oh man.
like January, February 2006. And the workshop would be starting at 6 p.m. and I'd have couples calling me up until 4 p.m. trying to sign up. It was like people
Yeah.
were so desperate to talk about the loss and
Yeah.
what happened with Katrina and the loss of the belief that life is safe and your world is.
hmm
So that was,
I know.
those are some really powerful workshops.
So
I bet.
what David, what is kind of fun, and I guess we share that, and maybe the 4 of us share that with each other as a couple, is what's beneficial of these discussions, whether it's your podcast or our participation in this podcast, or when we are co-leading a workshop, we see our partners as competent others, and that our daily life is not typically our full experience, right? We're, so that's refreshing. And I think
For sure.
Yeah.
that's sort of, I think, healing, so, yeah, which is,
I think, yeah, that's actually really beautiful. Like, to maybe seek out moments in the day where you can look at your partner and find something that you feel that there's, and express the competence that you see in them. I think as a mom or as a wife, sometimes we get very bogged down with our to-do list, and husbands, there's lots of roles that we carry, whatever your partnership is, you carry certain roles. And then we kind of hustle and bustle. And like the point of Awake, at least, is, these significant losses that we have, we're lucky in a way and not lucky in lots of ways, but we're really lucky. And Cindy, you may feel like this with the loss you had in your life. It's like that death is in you forever. And it wakes you up about the way that you need to live. And you can come kind of get back into like a sleep state sometimes, but grief will pop right back up. And then you're wide awake again, saying to yourself, like, life is short. I'm not guaranteed tomorrow.
Right.
I want to be conscious with the love and the communication and the partnerships that and what I'm creating. Like if I'm going to go away from my children and choose it work, for me at least, I want to make sure that it's something of value. And I hope that our experiences, and it seems like yours as well, are touching other people's, because I wish that I wish people didn't have to suffer so bad in order to have stronger partnerships or be a little bit more connected to what they need in their lives.
Which goes to the point with David earlier, you were saying, and we're all in agreement. Wouldn't it be nice if they taught, like Cindy said, this language in high school? Or so we've had the occasion to offer a workshop to newlyweds or people considering getting married,
Cool.
and they throw up. They totally reject that, because it's like they're in the midst of romantic love. They're in the midst of, this is great. Why? It's like saying they need therapy. We don't have a problem. Why would we go in therapy? Why would we ruin this pleasure? Why would we sabotage? It's like you and Betty, I think it's Betty or Becky?
Betsy.
Had a covenant, which was, we don't talk about this stuff. Right. And those couples have a covenant. We're not going to, we don't need that. And so
we're happy.
Offering such a preventive, sort of a prescriptive prevention does not work.
I've actually given it as wedding gifts to some clients and friends. I wrapped it up in a scroll.
We gave it at our wedding. We gave it at our wedding.
Need this? I'm like, call me in 6 months.
And we never see them. And we never see them.
Well, I think then I propose another solution, because I think you're totally right. It's the equivalent of the book for grieving people. I don't know. We've talked about this.
The stages of grief.
No, like when I first started grieving really hard, I started looking for books to help me a little bit, Well, two things. Number one, when you're really grieving, you can't read. You can't, you literally cannot read.
Right.
And I couldn't, and when I could finally start to read again, I couldn't concentrate at all. So like the book for the acutely grieving person. So my point is that maybe, just maybe,
I'm listening.
we can help. We can help most by teaching these basic communicative skills to our children,
Right. And there is a book for parents and kids. It's how to, Giving the Love That Heals is one of Hendricks' later books, that you mirror your child. And gosh knows, I have a 20-year-old, that you don't mirror them exactly like you would your partner, because then they just go, you're mocking me. And really listening to your kid who really wants to tell you something, and you want to tell them why what they're saying is not right. It's like, just listen.
No, and that is a frequent revelation in every workshop group and in every couple. God, we should do this with our kids. We should teach them. And my God, how already impaired and wounded they are already. A recognition by the parents that their teens and their tweens or whatever are already suffering. And again, it's short-lived. We don't, we've always offered booster, sessions. Nobody ever comes. So it's these are, they're great ideas.
It's funny how you can create an entire thing that is so impassioned by the giver of the information, and you have to be ready. You have to be ready for healing, and we all know that. So like, I always laugh about, like, somebody was like, one of our parents was like, you really should stop saying F words on the podcast. I think it's turning people off. And we laughed real hard and said, are people listening like an F word because they're deep in healing and they're not afraid to be people? They're not people pleasing at this point. At this point, it's like the people that are coming to you, they're ready. They're ready for communication and techniques and to work on their marriage. And I wish there was an earlier way, but
so this brings up a common debate that Jan and I have about what is the natural state
Oh, you love to ask
of
this
a human.
question.
I would love to know the answer to this question. Is the natural state dead ass asleep, repressed, everything shoved down, doing your job, yelling at your kids occasionally? Or is the natural state one of feeling, one of emotion, one of true, deep understanding love?
Yes.
And Jan and I differ on those things.
I think B.
I personally think
Both.
that the natural state of
See,
humanity,
Good
if
answer.
given no interaction, is dead ass asleep. And my only evidence for that is it's way more common, right? I mean,
Right.
it's way more common to be asleep than
But I
not
think
asleep.
that's only more common if you read this book, is because it's innately given to us at 3 years old on, right?
Right.
Like,
And
you
I
learn
think
to be
that's
asleep
why
in early
mindfulness is important, that you're in touch
Agree.
with the very moment you're in and using your breath and
Right.
blocking out all the other noise. And gosh knows there's a lot of noise now, to just be ready
Right.
for the flow, because life is going to flow.
Well, wait,
I
talk
guess,
to us a little bit about that, though, because I know it's
Yeah.
very important for you guys. You teach a lot about in your workshops about breathing, staying conscious. So maybe give the listeners who are new to breathing, new to mindfulness, what are some like easy tips you might have for
So I
them?
was trained in the Imago method and also studied mindfulness, and I thought this is a perfect fit. If one partner is going to work on mindfulness, doesn't it make sense, if you're working on conscious couplehood, that both work on mindfulness and mindful
Right.
love, and remembering that your partner's not your enemy, and your automatic reaction that may come out of your mouth may be really hurtful to the human being across from you, and just using your skills, and maybe having a ritual in the morning where you sit down together and meditate, and or do a reading together. There's a great
Love
morning
that.
reader, 365 Days of Living Consciously, and just kind of be on the same page. And then I went into the breathwork training and conscious connected breathing out in Wisconsin. And that's a whole lot of just stay moving in your breath, because your breath is your connection to the universe. And we also hold our breath when something big happens, or we can't take it all in at the moment, and it gets stored in your body tissue. So
100%.
intense breathing will help release some of that. And if we don't pay attention to it, our bodies will pay attention to it.
Yeah.
Well, we are just so grateful that you guys have come on the podcast. I feel like we definitely have to have you back. Dr. Bob, I know there's some stuff in the next episode that we're going to put in the show notes. So Dr. Bob is an expert in the New Orleans area. He works in lots of different areas. I know. You're only licensed in Louisiana? Is that correct? Or also in New York State? New York State too. Okay, I knew it was double. So New Yorkers, I got a big New York population following. If you're looking for someone who does genetic testing to help you figure out if your psychiatric medications and even pain medications, it's like a lot of different medications. Dr. Bob is an expert in this. So I wanted you to touch on it just quickly. Mm-hmm. I know you have to head, but I was hoping maybe you might want to come back and talk to us a little bit about this, because this is a big, cool resource that a lot of people, I think, could benefit from.
Sure. I mean, maybe I'd be happy to come back. We could talk about
I would love that.
How the genetic work sort of fits into, medication management. It always pleases me a great deal when you do a genetic workup. And increasingly right now, it sounds like Medicare pays 100%. Medicare, red, white, and blue pays 100%.
Wow.
Medicaid in Louisiana now is paying 100%.
Cool. That's a big shift.
Commercial insurance, there's a copay of $400, and I think if you can afford it, the value is well worth it. I mean, it's just priceless, the information you get from it. And Medicare Advantages don't pay, so they treat that like a commercial insurer, so it's a $400. So you can get a good big bang for your buck And for some people, they get it for free.
What's the value of it?
What's the value of it? The value is that it gives your prescriber a clear course of action to optimize which meds your body's going to respond most favorably to. Another benefit is it's validating to patients who have often had lots of failures on meds, and they've been blamed. Maybe the physicians thought they were falsifying their reports or being overly dramatic about their symptoms and symptoms. So one of the greatest effects is that it brings a client back into a trust relationship with me, because they go, oh, you see, I wasn't crazy. My body and this results tell me why I had such a hard time and why I didn't respond to X, Y, and Z. So it reboots a potential therapeutic relationship with a client who's had multiple failures of getting help with myself. And
I would love to
say nothing for the time savings, right?
Yeah.
You used to say, well, we need you to be on this for 6 months before we're going to see.
Right.
And then, 6 months, it doesn't work. We got to wait another 6 months on the next medication. I mean, before now,
these medications
you've got a suicidal patient for 2 years trying to find a damn medication.
It's
suffering.
It really oftentimes feels like malpractice when I have patients come to me and then malpractice further enacted when a physician, if I'm doing a consult and the physician doesn't even want the material or to use it as a guideline, so that's currently, so there's past horror and current and moving forward, there's still a lack of a medical acceptance of it as a tool. And it's oftentimes unfathomable for me to see that get discarded,
Right.
So,
well, especially with the motherfucker gene, it's interesting. So my son found out that he has a gene, I don't know if it's a deletion, but he's missing the gene that helps push serotonin from nerve to nerve, right? Is that correct, Dr. Bob? I'm assuming what you told me.
Motherfucker gene is responsible for converting folate,
converting the
L-methylfolate sort of formulation, which is then the building block for serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine. So if you don't make,
it's a huge deal.
If you can't convert,
there's got to be a lot of people suffering from this.
It's you're born without the necessary, sort of mental resources to cope. Doesn't cause depression necessarily, but you lack the juice to cope with depressive incidents or anxious moments or attention, because it's also, so it's profound. Sometimes it's impact.
It's profound.
Yeah.
And to the listeners out there, if this is something, I'm going to put Dr. Bob's practice in the show notes as well as Dr. Cindy's practice. So if you guys are looking for a couples therapist, please look in the show notes. There'll be lots of information on the books that we talked about today. I highly recommend you looking in their work. When my son lost his dad, acute depression happened in big time for him. And I don't want to go too much into his medical information online, but I would say that his depression was so severe and we tried medication and a lot of things were not working for him. He just could not get over the hump. And he was doing a lot of talk therapy and all the things that like one would need to access and get help. When we did this genetic testing, which Bob recommended, I hate to admit how much earlier he recommended before I did it. I think it was like 3 or 4 months I dragged and then finally did it. We found out he had the motherfucker gene issue. He started to take a vitamin. It's a prescription-based vitamin, but a methylfolate every single day. And let me just say this, that my child literally was reborn from that. And I can't imagine how many more medications I would have put him on because I just couldn't find any solutions or relief. And he, the glass was half empty for him every minute of the day. And he was a really happy kid before this acute thing may have pushed it over the edge. He always had this, but I think the situational thing that happened after losing his father, he could not get back on his feet. And I swear to God, I really have you to thank. It's, to this day, when he doesn't take the vitamin, it is instant. I can read that he has not taken that vitamin. So is David. We're like, did you take your Enlight today? and he was like, oh shoot, I forgot, like run back upstairs. And now he'll be like, oh man, I forgot to take it. And I felt I had the hardest time like getting through the morning. You know, I just felt so sad. So it's so interesting. He must have like, you know, maybe a more severe case than others, but
Right.
it's been a game changer. So for those of you who are looking for solutions to your mental health, you know, taking this test, I can speak as a mom, which is like the most hovery version of healing, right? Dr. Bob knows, like, I'm always like getting anxious about him getting anxious, trying to find relief. But, you know, if anyone's going to fight for you, it's your mom, you know, and I will say that it was so powerful. I learned more than just the depression. You know, he also, because of this, like, isn't a normal kiddo who can take Advil, may not relieve in the same way. If he ever had to have a surgery, I learned that, you know, narcotics or pain medications may not hit him in the same way. So he'd do better with a non-narcotic medication. So it was really, 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 really informative. And I just think it's something to share. So I loved having you guys. I hope that we can do this again. Why don't I let you guys close it up? Maybe just give us a little...
close up my side.
Yes,
one of the most fun moments, fun now in retrospect, was at the beginning of the workshop. Everybody goes around and says their first name, what their partner's name is, what they do, or anything else that we should know. And so we go all the way around the room. There were probably 12 couples in the room, and we get to Dr. Bob, and Dr. Bob says, I'm Bob, and I'm Cindy's husband, and we co-present these, and I'm a psychologist, and I'm retired. And I mean, you could have knocked me over.
Did you know he was retired?
Because I'm supposed to be leading this workshop, and I'm like, you're what? And like he decided to go from academia to, you know, living full time in New Orleans, and I was like, oh my gosh! So I had to mirror that. I had to say, so you're Dr. Bob, and so that, you know, that was one of the moments that sticks in my mind.
You're like, we're going to start the workshop off by us doing the MAGA dialogue technique here in front of you.
We hadn't
appreciate you guys.
We hadn't spoken to one another in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, so we hadn't gotten to it.
It was an opportunity, I thought, to have a conversation. Yeah.
Look, I think transparency, like one of my favorite things about being in the healing realm or holding space for people who are trying to get more mindful, which is what I'd say I do. When we do retreats, it's the exact same thing. I think vulnerability and being able to show that you're working on it and you don't have it all figured out. Like none of us have this all figured out. It's that you might be an expert in a tool.
They're not alone in their struggle, you know?
And that feels really good when you meet someone in that the world is suffering in the same way that you are. And we all just need to look for solutions and tools. And that can be varied from person to person. Well, I hope that everyone comes to see you guys. Don't retire yet, Bob. I mean, I'm not to send
that
you
was many years ago.
I know, Cindy, I know you're not retiring anytime soon. So look for them in their workshops. I actually would love to like potentially host you guys for a couples. We're trying to put together a couples retreat. We'd love to go to Mexico. So we'll keep you in the works. We'll keep it in discussion. Okay. Well, you guys.
Portugal in a couple of months.
Woo!
Nice.
Okay, Portugal sounds even better. Yeah, that would be amazing.
Okay.
Great
All right, well, thank you guys.
Thank you so much.
You too.
Right.
Yeah, nice.
This has been Wake the F Up podcast, hosted by Alix and David Long. Be sure to check out other episodes where our community of experts share tools and ideas to help you wake to the life inside of you. If you enjoyed this episode of Wake the F Up, please like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Join the Wake community by downloading our app. Just search for The Wake Wellness in the Apple or Android App Store. And follow us on Instagram at The Wake Wellness. Thanks for listening.